Isn't it a great day to be a Christian? We started last night a series of lessons talking about different men and women of the Bible. The verse we referred to was Romans 15:4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. And I think all of us will agree we could use some more patience, and we could use some more comfort. We could use some more hope. So we're studying some Bible characters. Last week we talked about what it meant to pray like Nehemiah, what it meant to obey like Daniel. Tonight we're going to look at what it means to lead like Moses and to build like Daniel. So let's take a look at Moses first of all. Moses is one of the few characters of the Bible that we're given his complete biography. When we first are introduced to Moses, he's being born. Moses is born in Egyptian captivity. We remember that he was placed in the ark of bulrushes and that Pharaoh's daughter drew him out of the water, and he grew up in the home of Pharaoh's daughter. We read about him going into the wilderness to tend his father-in-law's sheep, and then we read about him leading the Israelites out of the promised land, and it ends up telling us about his death at 120 years old in a mountain overlooking the promised land. Being raised in the house of Pharaoh's daughter made Moses uniquely equipped to lead God's people out of Egypt because he knew both cultures. He knew what it was all about, and he was the best man for the job, but that doesn't mean Moses was a perfect man. Moses had some faults just like everybody else. Remember, Moses was passionate. In fact, the reason he had to leave Egypt is because he lost his temper. He got angry. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he killed him. Buried him in the sand, and he had to flee because of that. Moses was a man that got angry sometimes. You remember when he came down out of the mountain with the 10 Commandments and he saw the Israelites partying around this golden calf. He got angry and threw the tablets of stone down on the ground and broke them. So Moses had faults. One of his faults was he was insecure. You remember when God came to Moses and told him, I want you to lead my children out of Egypt. He said, get somebody else. I don't want to do it. And Moses kept on making excuses over and over. Exodus 3:11, he said, who am I that I should go into Pharaoh, that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? But when God convinced Moses that he was the man for the job, he was one of the greatest leaders in all of the Bible. So tonight we're going to look at what does it mean to lead like Moses. Well, number one, to lead like Moses, you've got to understand the mission. You may have heard this story about the woman that sent her husband to the grocery store. She told him, get a gallon of milk. And if they have donuts, get a dozen. So he came home with 12 gallons of milk. And his wife said, why in the world did you buy 12 gallons of milk? And he said, they had donuts. He didn't understand the mission. He didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing. But Moses did. Sometimes we get confused, but when God sent Moses to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, Moses knew exactly what that meant. He knew what was expected of him. Look at Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, God's been speaking to Moses out of a burning bush, and he told him this, beginning in verse 7. Said, I've surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. I'm come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good land and a large, into a land flowing with milk and honey, under the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is coming to me. I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. God told Moses why he was needed. And then in verse 10, he tells him what he wants him to do. Come now, therefore, I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. God told Moses he was supposed to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So when Moses got the children of Israel out of Egypt, when they crossed the Red Sea, when the Egyptian army had been destroyed, did you ever wonder why he didn't say, okay, God said for me to get you out? I got you out. I'm going back to Midian. Canaan's that way. Y'all have a nice day. Because Moses understood the mission. He knew that Israel might be out of Egypt, But that was the easy part of the job. God had done all the heavy lifting and that. He had sent the plagues. When they come to the Red Sea, God had parted the waters. God had gotten the Israelites out of Egypt, but that didn't take very long. They got out of Egypt in just a few days. It only took a short amount of time to get the Israelites out of Egypt, but it was going to take 40 years to get Egypt out of the Israelites. And that was the hard part. And that was what Moses' mission would be. And he understood that. And he understood what God wanted him to do. And Moses was determined to do the job. So number one, if you're going to be a leader like Moses, you have to understand the mission. Number two, you need humility. Moses was humble. Numbers chapter 12 verse 3 says this, "Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth." Other English translations say that Moses was very humble. He was the most humble man on the face of the earth. It's kind of interesting to understand Moses didn't think of himself more highly than he ought. That's what humility is. We find that in Numbers chapter 12 verse 3. Do you know who wrote Numbers? Moses did. So Moses wrote that Moses was the most humble man on earth. We wouldn't think that was very humble, but God wouldn't let it be in Scripture if it weren't the truth. Moses was a man of humility, and God chose a leader with humility to get his people out of Egypt. When you think of our political leaders today, one of the first thoughts you think of, one of their first faults is they're all wrapped up in themselves. They want to be the big shot. They want everybody to see them. When they vote, sometimes they vote just so people will look to them. God knows that good leaders are humble. Good leaders know who they are. They know where they're going. Great leaders know whose they are and who is getting them to where they want to go. If I'm going to lead like Moses, I need to understand what Paul wrote in Philippians 4:13, that I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. To be a leader like Moses, you've got to be humble. Number three, leading like Moses means rejecting compromise. When Moses first approached Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go," Pharaoh told him no, he wasn't going to do it. And then after a few plagues, all of a sudden, now Pharaoh's ready to negotiate. He said, let's talk about this. He kept offering compromises. In Exodus 8:24, he said, "We'll let you worship your God, but you got to do it here in Egypt. You can't leave the land of Egypt." In chapter 10, verse 11, he said, "Okay, you can go worship, but just the men. The women and children have got to stay behind." In Exodus 10:24, he said, "Okay, we'll let everybody go, but you got to leave your flocks and herds behind." Moses wasn't willing to compromise. Moses refused to do anything less than God had asked him to do. In Exodus 10:9, we read what Moses told Pharaoh. Moses said, "We will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds, we will go." That was the mission. That was the job. Moses understood it, and he wasn't willing to compromise. If we're going to lead like Moses, we can't compromise on what God expects us to do. Number four, if we're going to lead like Moses, we have to show grace. Over and over during the trek across the wilderness, Moses had to deal with problems with the Israelites. They continually showed their disdain for God, for Moses' leadership, and God kept punishing them. He'd send plagues, he sent serpents, he sent hunger and thirst. Once they complained about not having meat, and so he buried them waist deep in quail. If you think about it, Moses had to deal with lots and lots and lots from the Israelites, and God said he would have spared Moses from having to deal with all that. Back at the very beginning of the wilderness wanderings, just after Moses had received the 10 Commandments, look at Deuteronomy chapter 9. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 13, God's talking to Moses, and it says, "The Lord spake unto me, saying, I have seen this people, behold, it's a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make of thee a nation mightier and greater than they." God told Moses, said, "Look, just step aside. I'm going to wipe all these people out, and we're going to start fresh, just you and me. And I'll make a group of people just as special for you to lead to the promised land." Now, if I've been Moses, I've been interested in taking that. I won't have to deal with them anymore. That was how Moses thought. Moses didn't take the easy way out. Moses showed compassion. Moses showed grace. Instead of saying, go ahead, God, just reward me, punish them, we read this. Look at verse 24. Deuteronomy 9, verse 24. It says, ye have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Thus I fell down before the Lord 40 days and 40 nights as I fell down to the first. Because the Lord had said he would destroy you, I prayed therefore unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, destroy not thy people and thine inheritance, which thou hast redeemed through thy greatness, which thou hast brought forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember thy servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look not unto the stubbornness of this people, nor to their wickedness, nor to their sin, lest the land which thou broughtest out say, because the Lord was not able to bring them into the land which he promised them, because he hated them, he hath brought them out to slay them in the wilderness. Yet they are thy people, and thine inheritance, which thou broughtest out by thy mighty power, and by thy stretched out arm. Moses showed grace. He prayed for the people that had turned their backs on him. Leading like Moses requires being humble. It requires compromise. You've got to know your mission. You've got to show grace. And then we save what's most important for last. Leading like Moses requires faith. The text in the bulletin sums this up. Go to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Faith Hall of Fame. Starting in verse 25 says this. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, as by dry land, which the Egyptians essayed to do, were drowned. Everything Moses did, he did through faith. He did by faith. He did because he believed in God. If we're going to lead like Moses, we've got to lead through faith. Now let's look at what it takes to build like Noah. First thing's pretty simple. Just like we said with Moses, building like Noah requires faith. Stay in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 is the Faith Hall of Fame. And very early in the list of the faithful people there, we find Noah. Look at Hebrews 11, beginning in verse 6. Hebrew writer says, but without faith it's impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned of God of things as not seen, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Noah believed in God, and he believed that God would reward him if he did what God told him to do. Now let's go back to Genesis and find out how the story of Noah began. Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, and let's start reading in verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Look at verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord? Look at the next verse. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. God chose Noah to build the ark because Noah was just. God chose Noah to build the ark because Noah did what God wanted him to do. Noah had faith, and building like Noah requires that we have faith. To build anything for God, we have to have faith. Now let's see what else is necessary to build like Noah. After God told him to build the ark, he told him exactly how he wanted the job done. Go down to verse 14. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, room shalt thou make of the ark, and shall pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit thou shalt finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And then after he told Noah exactly how he wanted the ark built, he told him what was going to happen next. Verse 17, and behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I will establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of everything of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. God chose Noah to build the ark. He chose Noah because he was just. He chose Noah because he was faithful. And then he told him exactly what he wanted him to do. And look at verse 22. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And that's point 2. If we're going to build like Noah, we got to build according to God's plan. We can't do it our way. We have to do it God's way. Noah didn't listen to God, give him all the dimensions of the ark and all the things he was supposed to do and say, that's a really great plan, God, but I've got an idea. How about for the partitions between the animal stall, instead of using gopher wood, we use cedar? I mean, wouldn't that smell a lot better? And you didn't say not to use cedar. You said to use gopher wood, but you didn't say we couldn't use something else in addition to that. Noah didn't say, oh, I know, God, you said put in 1 window, but listen to me now. If we put in 2 windows, that'd give us cross ventilation. The air could blow through and that would clean out some of the smell out of the ark. Don't you think that'd be a good idea? I mean, God said put 1 window, but he didn't say don't put 2 windows, so I think I'll do it that way. No, Noah built the ark according to God's plan. And what did God do? Look at Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Noah was faithful. Noah was obedient. And as a result, he and his family were blessed. And we don't have to wonder what that has to do with our salvation, because the scripture tells us. Look at 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 20 and 21 say this. God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. The like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. To build like Noah, you've got to have faith. To build like Noah, you've got to follow God's plan. To be saved, you've got to have faith. To be saved, you have to follow God's plan. To be saved, you need to be a Christian. It's the only life worth living, the only death one would dare to die. Once you become a Christian, God expects you to lead other people to Him. Once you become a Christian, God expects you to build things. He expects you to build a good family. He expects you to build a good evangelistic church. But to do that, you've got to have faith, and you've got to do it His way. If you've been doing it your own way, and you've wandered astray, and you think you need to come back on course tonight, won't you do it right now as we stand together, as we sing.